Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. New unit, cool stuff to talk about. You're going to like this. Alright, so we finished the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln has been assassinated. There is a pivotal time in American history. It is worthy of being its own unit. This is called Reconstruction. This is a time period when you have to reconstruct America, bring it back together. The South has lost the Civil War. They've surrendered. Now they're going to have to bring the South back into the United States. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of tension because 600,000 people died in a war between the North and the South, and now they have to come back and kind of hug it out. So it is a very, very tense political time in American history that is referred to as Reconstruction. All right. So when they say Reconstruction, which is what this time period is, what they're talking about is reconstructing the South to look like the North. The North won. The United States of America won. The Confederate States of America lost. So the United States of America isn't the one having to change. It is the South, and their entire way of life is fundamentally going to change, or at least they believe it's going to change, because guess what's outlawed now? Slavery, which was a pivotal tentpole in the fabric of their society and the way they did things prior to the Civil War. All that's got to change. So bringing them back in, it leads to some very interesting stories that we're going to start talking about today. All right, let me make myself smaller, put myself up here in the corner. Boop, 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 boop. And we'll go right there. That'll work. All right, Reconstruction. So, some random concepts here. So, all the slaves are freed. 13th Amendment, when the South comes back in, all the slaves are freed. So the slaves have a unique name at this time period. They're called freedmen. All right. A freedman is somebody who was a slave who is not. All right. So a freedman is a term for, and pretty much at this point, it's African Americans, black people. Were the only there weren't, that I am aware of, a single instance of like a white person at this time being a slave and then being freed and being considered a freedman. So all the freedmen are black people, all right, and African Americans. And I'm going to actually, let me go ahead and clarify this because I think this is the first time I'm going to get to this in American history of the term African American and black people, and why in American history it is. I will most often use the term black, all right? Because African Americans only apply to Americans, all right? And so if you're talking about the race in general, all right, you have white, black, shouldn't be offensive. I don't believe it to be offensive to anybody. But the reason that it makes more sense is like, talk about World War II and the Holocaust, all right? Hitler killed all types of people in the Holocaust, not just Jewish people, all right? Hitler killed a whole bunch of black people, all right? People of African descent. Hitler didn't kill any African Americans, but he killed a whole bunch of black people. And you're like, wait, what? How's that the same? Because African Americans apply to black people in the United States. So African Americans only applies to African Americans. So at this point, yes, the term African American works, but if it ends up being synonymous with a race of people instead of a race and culture, it can cause some issues in the future. Anywho, there were free black people, obviously, before the end of slavery. But as soon as slavery ends, racism is just absolutely massively prevalent in the United States. And even if you were a black person that was free before the 13th Amendment, you're going to experience the same racism against you that freed slaves are. All right. The question is, how do you shift the freedmen into society? And the reason that term is only used for one generation is if you're a freedman and you have a child, and it's free men or women called freedmen, if you have a child who is not born into slavery, the child will never be a freedman. So a freedman is purely a term used for people that were in slavery that are no longer in slavery. All right. So the big question is how do you bring them back into society? And how do you repair the damages in the South? I'm going to show you some pictures here in a second. But here is what the United States is faced with at the end of the Civil War. 624,000 soldiers died. 2/3 of the South's shipping industry has been destroyed with the Navy. 4 million slaves are free. So you have 4 million more humans in the United States now. What do you do with these new humans, all right, that are now not property? They are people living in the United States. The planners, so the equivalent of 4 million slaves is 3 billion in labor. That is an absolutely astronomical number at the time. There's also really high unemployment by poor white Southerners. Everything had gotten destroyed in the Civil War. And we're going to start talking here shortly about the radical Republicans. But speaking of the unemployment and things being destroyed, this is a picture of Atlanta in 1866. Remember, Sherman's March to the Sea, he went through and just destroyed everything he came upon. So these are like big old buildings and all that just get burned to the ground. So in 1866, a year after the Civil War, Atlanta is just in ruins. So the South's like, who's going to pay for this? And the United States is like, what? They're like, yeah, so we're now part of the United States, so I guess you guys have to pay for what you destroyed. And so there's tensions already here. And then so Atlanta, Sherman's March to the Sea, all right? So this one, you can make the argument that, maybe this is a little overkill. Richmond, Virginia, after the Civil War, is completely destroyed. Now, you went through my whole course here on the Civil War, and you're like, wait a minute. You never talked about Richmond being destroyed? What do you mean that they surrendered? Like Lee never even invaded Richmond. You're correct. So here's what happens, all right? When Lee didn't invade Richmond. Lee was defending it. When Grant was wrecking shop here in the Shenandoah Valley, it was obvious that the war was going to be over. So all the leaders here in, like Jefferson Davis, everybody that was in Richmond had to flee. So they had to evacuate the city. All right. And as they're leaving the city, they decided to keep the Union soldiers from being able to come in. They're going to set all the bridges on fire into the city. All right. So the Confederates set their own bridges on fire as they leave so that the Union soldiers can't get into the city. Well, they set it on fire and everybody ran away. That fire and a whole city made of wood spread from the bridges to the city. And there was no fire department. It was an evacuated city. So the whole city just burns to the ground and gets completely destroyed. And so after the war, there's this big the Union came in and burned it down. And the Union's like, no, we didn't. And they're like, we didn't do it. But it was, I guess, an accident. But regardless, Richmond's completely destroyed after the Civil War because the deserted city accidentally got set on fire by the South itself. All right. So you need to understand as we're moving on here. This is President Andrew Johnson. Little refresher here. Abraham Lincoln, when he was running for re-election in the middle of the Civil War, all right, didn't look like he was going to win. He needed everything he could possibly get to win this election in 1864. All right, didn't look like he had a shot. So, to get as many votes as possible, he picks as a vice presidential candidate a guy named Andrew Johnson. Now, the reason this was aggressive, I guess, politically, is Andrew Johnson isn't a Republican. Because all the Republicans are against slavery. So, like, the entire North, or the vast majority of the North, is Republicans. But there are some slave states in the North during the Civil War that are Democrats. All right? Lincoln, trying to get as many votes as possible, picks a Democrat, all right, somebody who supports slavery, as his vice presidential running mate in the election of 1864. Well, it ends up being a wash, and Lincoln wins huge because Gettysburg and Vicksburg, and he'd gotten popular by that point. Well, shortly into his second term, Lincoln gets assassinated. So the war is over. Lincoln gets to relax. Lincoln's assassinated. All right. So all of Congress is Republicans. But the president of the United States now is Andrew Johnson, a Democrat who supports the South. This is the guy who's in charge of the United States government when the United States government is supposed to bring the South back in. You can go ahead and imagine the people in Congress that are all Republicans are very against Andrew Johnson. With all the Democrats in the country are still in the South. The South doesn't actually have the ability to vote in any elections until they officially become a state again, which means they have to accept the 13th Amendment and all that. So it is like all Republicans in the North led by a Democrat, and they don't like each other. All right. So what ends up happening in the Republican Party is the Republican Party kind of starts fighting itself and splits itself. So everybody in the Republican Party is against slavery. Half of the Republican Party is like, good, we've won the Civil War, let's move on. And then the other half of the Republican Party, and they're going to start calling themselves radical Republicans. They're like, wait, move on? No, we're not moving on. The South needs to be punished. All right. The radical Republicans in Congress are furious at this idea that the South could just come back in and be normal like nothing happened. So they're like, no. Yeah, the war's over, but it is time to aggressively go after the South for the things they have done in the past. So how you're going to approach this concept is going to be very different depending on who you are. Like, how are you going to reconstruct the United States at the time? Thus the term Reconstruction. So here's the different plans, and it's important to understand because you're having to start everything from scratch. All right. So you're having, it's almost like writing the Constitution. I mean, it's not quite that difficult or quite that blank slate, but it's probably the closest thing we've had since writing the Constitution. How are you going to bring the South back into the United States? So here's your options, all right? Lincoln, he's got his plan. So when Lincoln was still alive, 1863, once the war started going decently, he was like, all right, I got a plan. So in 1863, and this is called the 10% plan. So Abraham Lincoln, keep in mind, he is a Republican. Lincoln would not be considered a radical Republican, all right? He's against slavery, but he also doesn't want to punish the South, all right? So he's like, all right, so when the war's over, for the South to come back in, here's what they have to do. Number one, they have to abolish slavery. Every plan says you have to abolish slavery, because that's what caused the Civil War. So all these different plans that we're going to talk about, every one of them, you have to get rid of slavery. Lincoln says, all right, so once they abolish slavery, in order to become a state again, 10% of the elected officials in every Southern government has to be able to prove that they at no point ever supported the Confederacy. All right. So this is why it's called the 10% plan. He needs 10% of the people in the government to know they always supported the Union during the Civil War. Now, even if that goes through, and how you would prove that, who knows? But that 10%, that's not enough to do anything. You're like, why would he even require that? Keeps him some snitches in the government. If he knows 10% of the government is loyal to the United States of America and the Union as the South comes back in, they will keep him updated if there's anything shady taking place in the South. So he's basically just looking for some snitches here in the South. This is actually extremely lenient. I mean, as you saw, like, he didn't punish Lee and things like that at the end of the Civil War. Extremely lenient because Lincoln's entire goal, all right, while he was alive, was to bring the South back in. Being super mean to him isn't going to help. Well, so when he creates his 10% plan, a lot of the Republicans in the North are like, nah, that is way too nice, all right? So the Republicans, they come up with their own plan, and it's called the Wade-Davis bill. I guess there's a dude named Wade and a dude named Davis, all right? The next year, all right, they say, all right, here's what has to happen. Not only do you have to abolish slavery, the majority, not 10%, 51% of all the people in the government in the South have to be able to prove they never, ever, ever, ever supported the Confederacy. First off, I don't know if you could even find that percentage to be able to do that in the South. And then they said any former Confederate volunteers, basically anybody that that fought in the war, you can't hold office. Like, what everybody fought, like leaders running out of men left and right. So this is a very aggressive one that gets passed. Lincoln's going to veto it. Lincoln's going to be like, nah, that's too mean. All right. Well, it's all a moot point because once it's actually time in 1865 to come up with a Reconstruction Plan, guess who's in charge? That's right. Andrew Johnson, all right? So Andrew Johnson, this is Andrew Johnson. So here's Johnson's plan. Now, he's the president of the United States, all right? He says the majority of white men must swear loyalty, but basically moving forward, not in the past. You just have to prove you have to, all right? Like moving forward, let the bygones be bygones. Now, Johnson, because this is so much more lenient on the South, he gets a lot of hate at the time. I would like to point out that this is a man who is sympathetic to the South. All right, he wasn't going to be a Confederate or anything, but he does understand that the focus is on the United States moving forward. And so it's not just the complete free-for-all here. He does say, no, you have to swear loyalty. Like, yeah, I understand. I understand where you guys are coming from. You still lost. The United States won. I'm in charge of the United States. We're going to do what's best for the United States. So he does do that, but it falls way short of what a lot of people wanted from a Republican president. I am trying to build him up a little bit because he ends up being a massive turd. You know, we'll talk about some stuff that makes him really unlikable by modern standards. But he wasn't complete and total evil. He did, I think, take his job as the president of the United States very seriously and wasn't just here to benefit the South. All right. Must ratify the 13th Amendment. Ratify means to accept. You have to accept the 13th Amendment, which says slavery is illegal, not a thing anymore. All right. And he also says, you know what? I don't care. You can be a former Confederate. Robert E. Lee can be a governor. I don't care. And he allows this. Now, as the president, he kind of forces this through. Congress is furious. So here's a cool story of what happens. Congress hates him with a passion. And the drama between Johnson and Congress at the end of the Civil War, because he's a Democrat, they're all Republicans, gets like out of hand here in a little bit. But so Congress is furious about this. So what Congress is able to do, or I guess they chose to do, is they said, all right, fine, if that's your Reconstruction Plan, but you can't pardon everybody, which means like all the soldiers, you can't say that they are immune from getting in trouble. He's like, yes, I can. They're all pardoned. Like he just blatantly says, yeah, they are. They're all pardoned. Nobody that fought in the Civil War can get in trouble. I pardon them all. Because that is the power of the presidency. Congress gets really angry about it, and they're like, well, fine. But they're looking at the fine print. They're like, okay, but you can't pardon the officers unless you personally go and give them a piece of paper with your signature on it saying that they're pardoned. So there's that. Thinking that they've caught him. Because how is he going to visit every Confederate leader in the South and give them an individual pardon? They got him. Nope. So here's what Johnson does when they make him do that. It's like, oh, okay. So they need an individual signature from me? All right. Well, so here's what I'm going to do. He gets a book, opens it up, and says, everybody that signs this book is pardoned. Opens up the blank first page and invites every weekend the Confederate leaders up to Washington, D.C. to come have a party at the White House and sign the book. So this is President Johnson pardoning the Southerners, all right? These Southern leaders that show up at the White House to sign this book to be pardoned. This completely blows up in the faces of the completely blows up in the face of the people in Congress, because now you know what they have outside all the time? Just Confederate leaders like hanging out and partying in Washington D.C. So Johnson pardoning the Southerners did not go nearly according to plan as they thought they would. All right, that's as far as I'm gonna get today. I know it's a little short, but I don't think you'll complain. We'll pick up from there tomorrow.